looking off into the darkness gave one a sense of wonderful security. But there now came upon us the roar and hiss of escaping steam from the boilers, issuing out of a large steam pipe reaching high up one of the funnels. But after all, it was the kind of phenomenon we ought to expect. Railway locomotives blow off steam when standing in a station. Why shouldn't a ship's boilers do the same when a ship is not moving? It's not the slightest exaggeration to say that no signs of alarm were exhibited by anyone. We all stood there quietly looking on at the work of the crew as they manned the lifeboats. All this time people were pouring up from the stairs and adding to the crowd. I remember thinking that it would be well to return to my cabin and rescue some money and warmer clothing if we were to embark in boats. But to pass by the throng travelling in the opposite direction would have been nigh on impossible. I was now on the starboard side of the top boat deck, the time about 12:20. We watched the crew at work on the lifeboats numbers 9, 11, 13 and 15. As we watched, the cranks were turned and the davits swung outwards until the boats hung clear of the edge of the deck. Just then, an officer came along from the first-class deck and shouted above the noise of escaping steam, "All women and children get down to the deck below, and all men stand back from the boats." Well, 2 women at first refused to leave their husbands, but partly by persuasion and partly by force, they were separated from them and sent down to the next deck. I think that by this time the work on the lifeboats and the separation of men and women impressed on us slowly the presence of imminent danger. But yet it made no difference in the attitude of the crowd. But if there were anyone who had not by now realized that the ship was in danger, all doubts on this point was dispatched in a dramatic manner. A sudden rush of light from the forward deck and a hissing roar made us all turn and watch as a rocket leapt upwards to where the stars blinked above us. Up it went, higher and higher, and then an explosion that seemed to split the silent night in two, and a shower of stars sank slowly down and went out one by one, and presently another, and then a third. Anybody knows what rockets at sea mean. We were calling for help from anyone who was near enough to see. The sailors standing by the pulley ropes let them slip through the cleats in jerks, and down the boats went until level with B deck. Women and children climbed over the rail into the boats, and then they were lowered one by one, beginning with number 9 and working aft towards number 15. While walking the deck, I saw 2 ladies come over from the port side and go towards the rail separating first and second class decks. An officer barred their way. They asked if they might board a boat. "No, madam, your boats are down on your own deck." The 2 ladies turned and went towards the stairway. No doubt they were able to board a lifeboat. I mention this merely to illustrate the separation of the classes. Almost immediately after this, a report went round that men were to be taken off on the port side. Now, I can think of no decision arising from reasoned thought that induced me to remain. But remain I did, with 1 or 2 others. I saw a bandsman, a cellist, come round the corner of the vestibule and run down the now deserted starboard deck, his cello trailing behind him. This must have been about 12:40 a.m., and I suppose the band must have started playing soon after this. Many brave things were done that night, but none more brave than by those few men playing minute after minute as the ship settled quietly lower and lower in the sea, and the sea rose higher and higher to where they stood. The music they played served as their own immortal requiem. I could see several of the boats now in the water, moving slowly away from the side without confusion or noise, and stealing away in the darkness as the crew bent to the oars. Almost immediately after this, I heard a cry from below, "Any more ladies?" I looked over the side and saw boat 13 swinging level with B-deck. The boat was almost full and about to be lowered. "No," I replied. "Well, then you'd better jump." I sat on the edge of the deck with my feet over, threw my dressing gown into the boat, and dropped into the boat near the stern. There appeared to be no feelings of fear or apprehension as we jerked down foot by foot. Rather, it was a great adventure, and certainly on my part, no doubts about reaching the water safely. It certainly was thrilling to see the black hull of the ship on one side and the sea 70 feet below on the other, and to pass down by cabins and saloons brilliantly lighted. As we touched the water, the boat was carried along parallel to the ship and directly under the place where boat 15 would drop. She was on her way down, and we shouted to the crew to stop lowering, but they appeared not to hear. And then, mercifully, another stoker sprang with his knife to the ropes and quickly cut them through, and we were washed clear of the Titanic and floated away as the oars were got out. It was quite the most exciting thing I had ever been through. As we left the Titanic, we had eyes for nothing but the ship. The night was one of the most beautiful I've ever seen, without a cloud to mar the perfect brilliance of the stars, clustered so thickly together that in places there seemed almost more dazzling points of light set in the black sky than background of sky itself. And then the cold air. There was not a breath of wind to blow keenly round us to make us feel cold. It was just a keen, bitter, icy, motionless cold that came from nowhere and yet was there all the time. And then the sea. The surface was like a lake of oil. One of the stokers said that in 26 years at sea, he'd never seen such a calm night. And it was in these conditions that we gazed broadside onto the Titanic from a short distance. She was absolutely still. It seemed almost as though the blow from the iceberg had taken all the courage out of her, and she had just come quietly to rest and was settling down without an effort to save herself, without a murmur of protest against such a foul blow. The sea could not rock her. There was no wind to howl noisily around her decks, just the sense of stillness about her and the slow, insensible way she sank lower and lower in the sea, like a stricken animal. One other thing was different from expectation. The thing that ripped away from me instantly all sense of the beauty of the night, the beauty of the ship's lines, and the beauty of her lights. And that thing was the awful angle made by the level of the sea with the rows of portholes along her side. The sea level and the rows of lights should have been parallel, should never have met. There was nothing else to indicate that she was injured, nothing but this apparent violation of a simple geometrical law, that the parallel lines should never meet, even if produced ever so far both ways. But her forward portholes were now below the level of the sea, and the after ones much higher above. We rowed away from her, praying that she would sink no further, and that we would find her at daybreak to be still there just as she was. But a stoker on board our boat was under no such illusion. He'd been at work in the stokehole. Suddenly, the whole side of the compartment came in, and the water rushed him off his feet. He sprang for the compartment doorway and just scrambled through the aperture as the watertight door came down behind him like a guillotine. In the intense heat below, he'd been working in thin trousers and singlet, and now his teeth were chattering with cold. He lay down under the tiller and fell into unconsciousness with another stoker's coat thrown over him. A lady with several coats and wraps and blankets distributed some of them among the less well-clad. Our little ship's company consisted of no first-class passengers. 3 women and baby and 2 men from second class, and the rest steerage and mostly women. About 35 passengers. The remainder, about 25, were crew and stokers. And all the time, as we watched, the Titanic sank lower by the head, and the angle became wider as the stern porthole lights lifted and the bow lights sank. And it was evident she was not to stay afloat much longer.